Hi students, today I'm going to help guide you through some of these texture practices and maybe give you a couple of tips and tricks that will help you create a little bit more realistic texture as we move into this texture unit. I'm going to start with fabric. Some of these textures you will actually be creating when we do a more finalized project. So specifically looking at these top 5, you will have to recreate these on a much larger scale, so you might want to take a little bit more time with those because this will be your only chance to practice. We're going to start with fabric, and when you are drawing texture, just like any of our other drawing projects, I would suggest starting by looking for shapes. So what I mean by that is I'm going to look at what some of these shapes are that the folds make and lightly try to draw those on my paper. So I'm looking for the lines and shapes that I can see that these folds make. So I'm just starting by lightly placing those on my paper. So if you can see that, I just started by lightly kind of drawing where I see some of those shapes in those folds. I'm just gonna draw one more here quick. Okay, for this, the fabric, I would suggest probably using some form of stippling or cross-hatching or a combination of the both, just because the fabric texture itself is kind of gritty and grainy. So that is why I'm suggesting using a texture that matches that. So I'm going to start with my darkest values first. So looking at this crease going across here, and I'm just using my pencil, just pressing down harder. I'm making sure my little cross-hatches are really close together. And you guys can use whatever pencils you feel fit. But now I'm just looking for areas where there are super dark values and starting to fill those in. So adding texture can take a really long time because you're observing, you're trying to make it look super realistic, which can take a long time. And the easiest way that you can look for textures, especially in folds, and as we move on to our next one too, is looking for, like I said, those shapes, looking for the values. So where do you see dark values? Where do you see light values? And that can kind of help break some stuff down. So now I have some of my darkest values. I'm going to be moving into some of my medium tone values as well. So thinking about this area, how it kind of blends from dark to this medium to this light value. I'm going to start to kind of space out my hatching lines, press down just a little bit lighter, but I'm trying to now blend my darkest hatching lines almost to the lightest areas. So the lightest areas, I'm just going to leave white for now. So again, I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'm going to start to blend some of those out. There is a little bit of a fold here, so I'm just going to try to replicate that. But I'm going to go ahead and finish up this section. Again, starting to move into my medium and light values. So you can pause the video here, you can continue to watch me, or you can start to practice on your own. Moving on to this next section, which is paper, I would suggest, again, using some form or combination of stippling and hatching and cross-hatching, just because, again, paper has kind of a gritty texture to it sometimes. And looking at this reference, you can see some of those little specks. So, again, I'm going to start by looking for some shapes and looking for areas where I will start to place my darker values. So it's easier to start by looking for big areas and big shapes when drawing textures like folds or creases or other things like that. So I'm going to start by looking for some shapes that I see within these folds. And this might take some practice. It's kind of hard. You're like, Mrs. Clammer, I don't know what you mean by shapes. But just kind of seeing where those folds are and trying to see some form or some shape that I can pick out. So then from there, again, you're going to move into your darkest values. You might use a combination. I'm going to start here in the middle just because that really stands out to me as being really dark. but you might use some form or combination of hatching, cross hatching, using pressure with your pencil, pushing down harder and lighter, drawing your lines closer or further apart from each other. I'm going to come in and use some stippling down here. But again, you'll want to start with your darkest values first. I'm trying to see where I have that here. And then move into your medium tones, your lighter tones. So I'm going to keep working. Again, you can kind of watch me for a little bit if you want to. Otherwise, this is going to be very similar to fabric. You might just use a little bit more stippling in this variation of the texture. So I'm going to keep working. Again, you can watch me for a little bit, but it's very similar to what I did up here with the fabric. For this next section, when we do glass, I would recommend using a smooth blending technique, meaning you're probably going to be using mostly your pencil, maybe your blending stump, but we want to try to achieve this very smooth looking texture. So again, I'm going to start by looking for shapes. So looking at like the opening of that mason jar, looking at maybe this outside edge of the mason jar, maybe even some of those lines. So again, we're trying to pick out some basic shapes that we will then fill in with our value and our shading. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just taking my time, drawing some of the lines and shapes that I see. It's really hard for me to talk and draw at the same time, but it's close enough. Okay, so I have some of my lines and shapes here. I might just scoot this one up just a tiny bit. It's kind of throwing me off. All right, after you have your shapes, then we're going to start seeing our value. And again, if we're thinking about smooth pencil shading, I always start with my lighter values, and then I gradually begin to add my darker values. To make something look smooth, you will have to work really slowly. You can also use some white spots on your paper. So I'm looking right here, and even here on the inside, it's going to be pretty light. So you can keep it white, or again, just use really, really light value. And then even down here, my mason jar is pretty light. So again, to achieve a smooth finish, you're gonna have to work slowly and make sure that you are filling in stuff completely. All right, then I'm gonna actually go to my dark values next, and I'm going to think about it in terms of, again, a shape. So this is kind of like a curved triangle shape. And that's almost black. So when I add that value, I want to push down super, super hard. Maybe I would bring in my 6B pencil and use that. But I'm going to start looking for some of my darker values. Kind of got this. And again, thinking about it more in terms of like a shape or a section or an area that I would fill in. So I'm going to continue working on some of those darker values, and then I'll meet you back up for these letters down here at the bottom. So next, I am starting to just place where I see some of my letters, and I'm actually going to redo that. So my letters are going to be kind of curved, so I'm just very, very lightly kind of drawing some guidelines to help me. And I'm just very, very lightly going to be drawing where those letters will go. These letters are mostly going to be shaded. There are like shapes to them. I made those letters a little too big, but it's okay for this purpose. So what I'm going to be looking for are like where I see these dark values. And then to make it look raised, it's just going to be very light. So just looking more for specific values and shading in those spots. And then leaving some of those areas very light or white. So it's going to be more or less just having a contrast of where the values are. So on this A, maybe thinking of it in terms of like negative space would help you out here. So you're just adding shadows around the negative space. So if we think of these light values as negative space, S. And then after I get my letters done, I would maybe go back and start filling in some of the more medium tones and just smoothing everything out. Again, trying to use my pencil as much as I can before I grab that blending stump. So I would go in and start to smooth out kind of this really, really dark value to the light values. Add in this medium value here. Again, working really slow to make sure things are as smooth as possible. But what makes glass look like glass is a very stark contrast between really, really light areas and these really, really dark areas. So as you're shading, you just want to make sure that you have kind of that very stark contrast between dark and then really, really light. So I'm just going to finish this up and then we can move on to the next one. For this next one, I already kind of started by placing those shapes that I've been talking about, marking some lines where I see these ridges in the can. The next step, we are trying to make this look shiny. So very similar to glass, I would suggest using like a very smooth blending technique with my pencil. So when I'm doing this, again, I'm going to be looking for some shapes where my darker areas are. I also want to notice where I see very, very bright highlights because again, it's shiny, it's reflective. So the sides of my tin can here are going to be very light. And you can also almost think of it as negative space, or again, think of it as like a shape. So those areas that are going to be very light are almost like an oval or almond shape. And then the center is where it's going to be the darkest. All right. And again, thinking of it here in between my lines, it's going to kind of come up in the opposite direction and then kind of smooth out underneath that highlighted area. So when I'm adding value, I like to think of it in terms of like shapes. I think it's easier for me to see it that way. So I'm going to go in and add my dark pressure here. I'm pushing down hard. Again, this would be like my highlighted area. My shadow would come underneath of that. So I would kind of start by marking my highlights and marking my shadows and start there. And then I will meet you back up and we will fill in the rest of our tin can here. The last step that you will do for this is blend in the darker values with your light shiny values. So I'm just going in and I'm going to be carefully blending in more of those medium tones that you need for the shiny effect on the tin. Again, make sure that you are leaving some of the areas, the white of the paper, just so you have those really bright highlights. So again, just taking your time and blending in those dark values into the very light and bright highlights. For the basket weave, this is going to take a little bit of time and patience. Again, just like all of the other textures we have done so far, you're going to want to start by making a shape. So here I am making a grid pattern. So I'm making my vertical lines, then I'll go in and make some of my horizontal lines. So I'm going to start by just getting a basic shape down. Next, I'm going to be going in and paying attention to the specific shapes of each part of the basket. And this is where it's going to start looking like it is woven together. So I am changing the direction of each of my lines, going vertically and then horizontally, and paying attention to where those shapes will start to overlap. Again, alternating which direction my lines go. So going vertically and then again horizontally. I apologize guys, but something happened to my recording. However, when you go to apply value, I would suggest using a hatching technique and then making sure that my lines are going in the correct direction. So in those spaces that go horizontally, my hatching lines will go horizontally, and then in those spaces that are vertical, my hatching lines will go vertically. Pay attention again closely to where you see super dark values and your really light values. You can also utilize the white of your paper, but I would suggest using those hatching lines and making sure that the lines are going in the same direction that they do on the texture reference that you see on your paper. For the rest of this worksheet, I would like you to try to utilize all of those techniques and tips and tricks that I gave you to finish up the scales, finish up the fur, and the water texture. For the scales, I would suggest using stippling, making sure that you pay attention again to the shape and the form of each individual scale, and then using stippling to add the value. For the fur, I would recommend using a hatching technique, again making sure to pay attention to the shape of the individual little fur clumps and then adding in those hatching lines. And then for water, I would use a smooth blending technique and making sure that again you are utilizing very similar things that we did with the glass and the tin can. I cannot wait to see how you guys do on this practice.